I think I could watch this all day. But I've got a video to make. Ah, the humble mining outpost. Critical in the mid to late game, especially on longer playthroughs. Just run some tracks in, plop down the miners, that's how I do balancers, don't worry about it, and set up the flamethrowers, and you've breathed new life into a micro factory. But life needs things to live, and you'll have to provide those things in a timely manner. Every outpost is a new mouth to feed. At the bare minimum, you can get away with oil and flamethrowers. Preferably light oil, but crude oil will do just fine. If it's an oil site, then you don't even need to bother with this step, just cut off some oil from the pump jacks to feed the turrets. For anywhere else though, if you're bringing in light oil, you can also cut off a bit of the light oil supply from the turrets in order to make solid fuel for the trains making supply runs. The more stations you have refueling trains automatically, the fewer times they'll have to interrupt their schedule to get gas. And the further out an outpost gets, the more likely it is that trains run too low on fuel to return to base to refuel at all. And for the most part, just flamethrower turrets will be good enough, at least to begin with. The amount of oil consumed by flamethrowers, or more accurately, the lack thereof, means that one train carrying light oil can supply any number of bases and spend 95% of its time idle. But eventually biters will chew on the walls and maybe spin on a few pipes, so you'll need repair packs. And the construction bots to use the repair packs, which can die in the fire, so that's another thing you'll have to automate. And maybe you'll want mines and turrets, and that means belts and inserters and power poles and ammunition, and suddenly you have a grocery list. Combat Mechanics Overhaul prevents spitter acid from reaching over a wall, so for the most part, you only need to resupply walls, ammo, mines, and repair packs. But in vanilla, you'll need an outpost to contain replacements for all parts of your defensive integument. Automating these supplies by train can be done any number of ways. The simplest by far is to filter the slots on a wagon. By limiting the amount of each item that inserters are capable of placing on a wagon, you can carry many different types of items without one taking up space that is needed for another. We simply need the train to wait at the supply depot to receive its stock, and each outpost to compare its current stock against a desired shopping list of items you want at that station, and when any item is below that stock, enable the station to allow supplies to be offloaded. This is done by hooking an arithmetic combinator to a roboport and multiplying its contents by -1, then running the signal through a constant combinator containing the shopping list, then feeding the signal to the station. Done in this way, any item that reached the station as a positive value means that its demand is currently above supply, and we can set it to enable if anything greater than 0. For additional robustness, you should first sanitize the signal through a decider combinator set to each greater than 0 than each, because items being carried by bots are held as a negative value in logistics network, and if they pick up, like, a miner and you don't have any miners in your logistics network yet, then that will create a false positive and generate a request for the supply train, because the negative value is multiplied into a positive one. Output chests can have their capacity limited so as to not drain unnecessary resources from the train when supplying others. Filtering inserters at the drop-off allows for us to unload as many supplies as we can fit chests, but only one type of item per chest. Slots in chests cannot be filtered in the same way as wagons, and before you come up with a brilliant idea to unload wagons into other wagons, unfortunately, the contents of a wagon cannot be offered to the logistics network. You are, however, capable of doing this, which... Mother of God. Unfortunately, in this simple configuration, it becomes difficult to load more than 12 different types of items into a wagon at once. Because if an inserter attempts to move items into a wagon and the stack of items it's currently carrying is too large to completely insert, the item will get caught in its arm and it's jammed for the rest of time. You can get around this by setting the stack size to 1, but nobody has time to wait on an inserter loading 1200 items one item at a time. That's just insane. You might be tempted to set the inserter stack size to be divisible by the item's total stack size. All stack sizes are divisible by 10 unless it's a train or a wagon. But if the amount of supplies pulled from the wagon varies in any way, this too will jam. It's fine on a completely empty train, but if only 16 of an item is pulled from the wagon at the outpost, then a standard 12-stack bulk inserter will get caught up with 8 items left in its arm and it can no longer progress. You can also make the train step through multiple stations in a row in order to load the wagon with all the necessary different kinds of supplies. Nothing wrong with this system aside from its footprint. Multi-stage loading stations start to get pretty long, and it might be tempting to save on that footprint by using a reverse train, but whoops, you can only load 11 different items on a reverse train due to the footprint of the station itself. Something that I mentioned in my video on reverse trains, but I guess a lot of people didn't watch that far. Multi-stage loading bays realistically max out at about 36 different kinds of items, which means 3 stations. This limit is imposed by the 40-slot limitation of item wagons. If you want to get the full 40, you need a 4th station simply to load the last 4 items. Won't really be necessary though. There are multiple items that a supply wagon will want to carry multiple stacks of. Ammo for one, also balls and mines. But if you do want those last 4 slots, you can do this. Awful, isn't it? But it works. I bet you thought I was done with cursed designs. Check this out. The cursed solution to loading 40 items into one wagon in as little space as possible even comes in 2 flavors. But this is disgusting. Let's not. Ah, damn it. Just kidding. This is the most space-efficient way to load 40 different items into one wagon. It might look fast, but it really isn't. The throughput of a bulk inserter is equivalent to 8 long-armed inserters. These 24 inserters are doing the work of just 3 bulk inserters. So just use 2 wagons. That's 24 different types of items you can load at one station. And yes, this was my solution too for the longest time, which in my space exploration run led to the construction of this abomination. And there's literally nothing wrong with running a supply station like this. It's simple, it's effective, you can make a train with 2 item wagons and a fluid wagon, and realistically, you are now good for supplying outposts at an acceptable footprint. Only an idiot would actually want something better than this. But I think you know where this is going. We can fit up to 40 different types of items on one train, and we can load it and unload it with a single inserter. And we can do it in a way that allows for an easy retrofit of its contents, and without using filtered slots on the wagon, and while using the maximum possible inserter stack size at all times. What you're about to learn might seem horrendously complex for what it's meant to achieve, but the advantage isn't just being able to carry more items on one wagon. It's also that the contents of these wagons can be altered universally from anywhere, just by modifying the contents of a saved logistics group. If you want to add an item to these trains at a later time, rather than changing the conditions on a bunch of stations, trains, and chests, you can do it from your inventory screen, and it will apply globally. We begin by creating a logistics group, a very useful feature added in 2.0. We want it to contain all of the things that an outpost should have at any given time. Do be mindful that you don't exceed the 40 stack capacity of a train wagon when making this list or appending it later. For convenience, you can make a logistics group containing all the contents of a saved blueprint just by holding the blueprint and clicking the Add New Logistics Group button. If you wish a station to be stocked with multiple times the contents of this blueprint, you can either add it many times to the constant combinator, or multiply the signal through an arithmetic. Multiplication makes for an easier retrofit down the line, but you will have to keep in mind the multiplication when adding new items on other logistics groups. Now for the supply station. The circuit conditions should be read train contents and send to train. We'll connect the station to an arithmetic that multiplies by -1, and then connect the output to a constant combinator containing the shopping list. Then sanitize that output with a decider combinator set to if each greater than 0 then each. Feed that output to a selector set to sort descending. This selector then outputs to an arithmetic combinator that converts the signal to S to set the appropriate stack size, and then to a second selector in order to synchronize the signal's travel time. This is important because if you don't do this, the wrong stack size may be applied to the wrong item for the first applicable tick and cause an overflow. And these are then hooked up to a bulk inserter set to set filters and set stack size. I'd like to point out that if you could just set the value of stack size internally in the inserter to each, anything, or even everything, these 2 combinators wouldn't be necessary. I honestly don't get it. Then we hook up the inserter to a decider combinator, which outputs C equals 1 if everything equals 0, or in other words, C is true if there is no input signal. Feed that signal on a different colored wire back to the train station. Now we can simply place a requester chest set to the same logistics group as the constant combinator in order to feed the inserter. The inserter will now fill the wagon with the exact contents that you have specified without overflow, and by setting the train to only depart when C equals 1, then the train will never leave without its full specified inventory of stock. You could simply enter all the item inputs manually, but that means anytime you change the contents of the logistics group, those contents are now desynchronized with the train's conditions. Doing it this way means that the train will always satisfy the conditions set by the logistics group before departing. It will need to depart from the station at least once in order for updates to the logistics group to apply, however, which is a marginal hiccup, but will self-correct. This is because a train that is waiting for its next stop to enable is not technically stopped at the current station, and therefore will not send its contents to the circuit network. Now for the outpost supply drop-off. Rather than reading the train contents this time, we'll read the entire contents of the supply chest or of the logistics network in its entirety using a roboport. We'll sanitize the output using a decider combinator and then multiply it by -1 and then run them through a constant combinator same as before. One end goes to the station, which is set to enable if anything greater than 0, and we'll do the exact same thing but this time use 2 constant combinators and send the signal through the selector arithmetic system for programming an inserter. We use 2 constant combinators to multiply the signal by 2, ensuring that a substantial buffer of materials are supplied above the demand. You can do this with an arithmetic combinator just by cutting off a line from the constant combinator of the station, but 2 constant combinators and an arithmetic combinator use the same amount of space, so whatever. Actually, we can do a bit better than that. By adding the same logistics group to a constant combinator twice, it now receives double the input, so no need for a second combinator. I only just realized this after building my first proof of concept. Construction and logistics bots shouldn't be fed into a chest. Instead, they need to be fed into a roboport directly, and that's where you wire an inserter into a roboport next to the train station and set it to enable if bots less than 50, in which 50 is the desired amount. Be sure to set the roboport to read robot statistics. Right-click all fields that aren't needed and replace the total construction bot signal, T by default, with the item icon for construction bots, and do the same thing for logistics bots if necessary. Now all bots in the network will be read by the train station as an actual item in the network rather than a representative. An additional constant combinator hooked up with the other 2 leading to the arm can be used to ensure that bots are never fed into a chest by accident, and we do this by setting it to constantly output an absurdly large negative number like -1 billion. Or you can just use the same thing with 1 combinator by adding a 3rd logistics group. I'm such a dumbass. Or if you don't want to bother with all that, just put a roboport next to the supply chest and hook an inserter off of it set to T less than 50 and call it a day. You realistically can only supply 3 things from the chest in this way, and ammo for turrets will definitely be one of them. For the departure conditions on the train, simply using 5 seconds of inactivity will suffice, and prevents the system from getting hung up if items that are being supplied are being consumed as fast as they are being supplied, which they definitely will for ammo on the first few trips to an outpost. Now, the throughput of a single bulk inserter is understandably not that high, but it really doesn't need to be. To showcase the flexibility of this system, I've made a bunch of simulated outposts. Each one operates with the conditions I've explained prior, but now there is an inserter program to take a random item from the provider chest and destroy it every 2 seconds. I did this using a simple constant combinator with a shopping list, a selector set to random input, and a resetting clock. And this system is great for supplying outposts. A fresh outpost needs to be visited twice or more in a row when first established, but then each will be sated for a while before the train needs to make another trip. And with these 12 outposts, just this one double-headed train can manage supply with extra downtime. That's 30 random items per minute, to 12 outposts or a total throughput requirement of 360 items per minute. Real outposts will rarely ever consume this much of anything. The locomotives are backwards on purpose. I did some testing with the racetrack, and it turns out that locomotives have the same drag coefficient regardless of their facing direction. Heartbreaking. A quirk of this specific stress test is that since items are being taken off the network while they are being supplied, all the numbers never reach maximum, and the train will depart once the inserter reaches an item in the list that the train no longer contains. Thankfully, since this system works its way from the items of highest demand to lowest, this ensures that it will always depart with all items very close to the maximum buffer. In practice, with the new station, this system will attempt to supply ammunition near exclusively as it's being taken out of the network the instant it is added, and will not supply additional items until the ammo belts are saturated. This is a temporary problem that corrects itself as soon as enough runs to the new outpost have been made, but if you're in a hurry, you can subtract ammo from the programmed inserter's inventory, just like with the bots, and use a second filter inserter to directly feed the ammo to a second provider chest. Perhaps it's a bit complex for what it needs to be, but it's a very reliable system. But you know what's better than that? Why don't we make a personal logistics train? A train that, at the player's request, can deliver specific materials over any distance. Same basic concept as before, but now we create a system for removing items from the train that are not requested. Branch off a signal from the shopping list, branch off the contents of the train and compare the two, but multiply the shopping list by -1, and then it's straight through to the two selectors and an arithmetic to an inserter to remove from the train. Now, if there's any item on the train that is not currently requested by the shopping list, or too much of any item from the shopping list, it will be removed. An active provider chest is ideal for this purpose. It's okay to admit you've never used one of these. They're the purple ones. I generally don't even automate them in my mall. I almost exclusively use them in my nuclear reactors to take away spent fuel cells. When both inserters have a null signal, the train can be fed a signal to depart. But this is where there's a hiccup. A train waiting for a station to become available will not feed its contents to the station, and therefore the system breaks. But we have a way around this. Radars can send circuit signals over any distance. They're not as versatile as signal transmitters from space exploration, as there's only one channel, but the call sign for this station can be a specific value of a specific arbitrary signal icon. I'll just use r equals 1. Now that I've set this up, I can go very far away, and with nothing more than a constant combinator, radar, and a station, I can modify the personal logistics group in my inventory, and then flip the constant combinator on, and as soon as the train is loaded with those items, it will depart and deliver my supplies. Functionally, you can do all of this with remote view, but it's not nearly as convenient or funny. I can tell a train kilometers away from my current position to deliver me a pizza, and it'll be here with bells on without me even having to go to map view. I can set its departure condition to if r equals 0, and that way I can just turn the constant combinator off to make it leave, and then back on when I want it to return. Look, it brought me elf modules to make this mining array less stinky. Goodbye. I know I forgot the rail signals for this entire outpost, but traffic was low enough that it never mattered, and I fixed it later. I'm sure my balancer and loader designs have made more than a few of you throw up in your mouth a bit, but I've never claimed to be good at this game, just to understand it. Took me a bit to figure out, so it's a late addition to the script, but I can retrofit that last design to react to a logistics network's current requests. Any item in that logistics network that is needed to fulfill personal logistics within the logistics zone connected to that roboport is fed as a positive signal from the roboport. We hook it up like usual, but we send it through the decider combinator set to if b greater than 0, then everything, and then only when I turn on this constant combinator that has b equals 1 will the logistics requests be sent through this radar. The signal is then picked up at the supply side and is separated into the item requests and the B signal for activation. When the train arrives, it will satisfy the logistics conditions, and so those will be removed from the logistics requests and won't be loaded on the next train. We can set the station to only activate if B equals 1, and we put it before the decider combinator so that any number of these stations can exist and they won't compete for the train's attention, or for the supply signal. And we can blueprint it. Put one of these stations at every outpost, press the button, and when you want supplies, it will just happen. Separating the signal at the supply station is harder than it initially seemed though due to the travel time of the signals. These additional selector combinators up here are doing nothing but lagging the B signal from reaching the station so that the train doesn't immediately depart when the request is sent through. And why bother pressing the button? Send the logistics request list through an arithmetic combinator set to add everything into a single value. And if the sum of everything is greater than 100, then send the signal b equals 1. Now the train will automatically deliver supplies that we need as we use them. Need to add an inactivity condition to the departure though, or it will leave a bit early. A working knowledge of supply-demand circuits like this make an unfathomable amount of things possible in Factorio. Once you understand how this works, you can do practically anything, and half the reason I play the game isn't to min-max my production, but more just to find new and interesting ways to do things that are unnecessary and already solved.